Hey guys, welcome to another video from the Parrott Bros. Now this video is all about remapping. So if you've got a stock car or you've bought a car and you're not sure of its map status but you want a few extra horsepower, this is definitely the video for you because we're going to cover some of the things to check, some of the things that you may not have thought about and plenty more. So before we get stuck into it, let's jump into the intro. So remapping. Maybe you're after a few more horsepower, or you're unsure of your car's current performance, or you just want to get it sort of dynoed and maybe get it a little bit more economical, more efficient. Whatever the reason, there is some stuff to consider. Now, different types of remaps, there's hundreds of mappers out there and they'll all offer different things, but basically they're all going to be relatively similar. They all usually offer some sort of software only map, which is where you take a standard factory car, make no alterations whatsoever and just drive it into there, and they'll normally do a software remap which will give you maybe 10 to 20% increase, depends on the car. If it's turboed, you're probably going to get a little bit more, or if it's like a big engine car like a 6.3 AMG or something equivalent, you may get a bit more figure wise. But basically it's a map that doesn't require you to make any hardware changes. So you don't need to change the exhaust, you don't need to change the air filter, you don't need to change the injectors, anything like that. And that is where you just drive it in, they'll plug it in, they'll do their map, they might dyno it before and after, and that'll give you a nice little bit of pep without having to change anything. And then if you want to revert it back to standard at some point, you can do, because you haven't made any physical alterations. So that's a great option, especially with the diesel stuff, because diesel turbos map up quite well. They get loads more torque and it changes the whole way that it drives. There's other types of maps which are hardware and software, which is where you're going to need to change components. So I'm just going to look at my screen here and read some of the details I've written down. Often requires hardware changes to increase the performance. So that's things like, I'll use a TT for example, because most of the people on this page watch it for TTs. On a TT, to go for anything over a software map, you're going to be looking at changing it to a bigger intake pipe, because it's all about flow. The quicker you can get the air in and out, the faster it will be. So you've got a bigger intake pipe, you'll put a bigger downpipe on, exhaust downpipe. You might put a sports cat or D cat on there as well to increase flow. You'll get a bigger intercooler because it allows more cold air to travel quicker. The things you may also need to consider, depending on how much you're pushing it, is whether you need a hybrid turbo, whether you need uprated fuel pump, uprated clutch, uprated injectors. It goes on and on. So the list is quite long. So that's kind of differentiating between the two as to whether it's just a software map. So say a TT, a 225, if you were to take it in for a dyno and it was a good car, didn't have any issues and it was healthy, you could go from 225 to say 250 to 260. That's the figures that they quote for just a software map. So that's no physical changes, and you've given yourself an extra sort of 25 to 35 horsepower, which you'll definitely notice. I mean, it's 10 to 20% is quite a bit of difference. It normally changes the way the car drives, so the power might be a lot lower down. It might give you a better delivery. It changes car to car, but that's the kind of things to consider. Now, most reputable tuners, so tuners that have dynos and do tuning day in, day out, are also mechanics usually, and they'll offer your car a dyno health check prior to mapping. If you look at a mapper's website, they might say, actually I've got one here from Badger 5, they say a dyno includes a health check, a smoke test, and a printout before and after. So what they'll do is they will smoke test your system. A smoke test will be carried out to prove out there's no leaks in the air system which could compromise performance. Identified poorly fitted, split or leaking pipework for your vacuum and air system. So that's things like if you've got an intercooler, your intake pipe after your MAF, your boost piping, all the little vac lines that go to your EGR and all that kind of stuff in different cars. Is any one of them pipes could have been fitted wrong. The silicons could have, if you imagine this is a silicon pipe, not a can of Coke, where you mount it on, it could be sat slightly wonky. Instead of being straight, it might be sat slightly wonky. It might be letting air in. One of your old Jubilee clips might be split. One of the little vac lines that goes from your inlet manifold to sensors might be perished, and it might just be letting a little bit of air in. You might have a one-way valve that's leaking. The pipe that goes to your brake booster might be leaking. There's crazy amounts of pipes and things where possible little tiny leaks could cause the biggest issue. And if your car's 20 years old, rubber that's had even exposure to oil could be compromised. So that's definitely one to check. They'll also do things like a dyno before and after. So they'll put your car on the dyno and they'll do a run. And then in that time, they'll be able to see whether it's fueling right, whether it's underperforming. You might have no boost whatsoever. You don't know. Your car could be in limp mode like mine was. Um, and the other thing that they mention is make sure you're running the right fuel. Now, it's one of those. If you have a performance car, you tend to put in 98 or 99, so V power, your momentum from Tesco's, etc. But it's not always the case. Now, most cars, especially performance ones, if you open the fuel flap, it will say 95/98, which means you can use both. It's recommended you put the better one in because the better fuel, the 99s, the V powers, the momentums, have more additives, and the additives help to keep your valves clean. They have additives in which are made for various reasons. If you look on YouTube, there's loads of videos of comparing fuel and all the different benefits. But the actual power loss, they did a video where they tried all the different fuels from 95s to 99s, and the difference was over 10 horsepower and 10 foot-pound, which is a lot if your car's only 220, 230 horsepower. So make sure you have the right fuel at the time of mapping, because then you'll be able to get the most bang for your buck. Now, things to consider. Now, this is just a list of things I've put together, which from being admin on forums and things like that, I've seen people ask time and time again. Now, before you go to any dyno, make sure you don't have any fault codes. So if you go for a service or you've got one of them little tools where you can plug it in and check, make sure there's no codes. Make sure there's no engine lights, because sometimes there's codes without an engine light. You could have a faulty O2 sensor. If you turn up for mapping and they can't measure your post-cat readings or your fuel to mixture ratios, then it could ruin your mapping session and then you won't be able to get a decent map. So that's definitely really important. No error codes, because obviously if you have a sensor down, there's no point going to a map because they'll say you've got a sensor down, we can't do anything. So it's sort of future-proofing your car prior to going for the map. Does your cooling system work? Does your radiator fans come on when it should? Does your car go straight up to 90 and never deviate from that? When it's hot, does the cooling fans run? Because if it doesn't, and you go for a map, it could overheat and you could chuckle your coolant out over their rollers and they'll be very unhappy. Is your servicing up to date? Now, this is crucial when mapping your car, because obviously you're asking your car for more performance. Is your cam belt done and water pump? Because if they're not, it could snap. Your water pump could fail under the extra pressure, trying to keep the engine cooler. Spark plugs, coil packs. Have your spark plugs been changed recently? Because if they haven't, they could well be blown out. They could be no longer pointy on the end. They could be domed and they'll misfire the moment you pull out of the garage, and then you're going to need 4 spark plugs and stuff like that. Has it got any oil leaks? All these kinds of things. And fuel filters. The amount of times I've seen people with issues because they haven't changed the fuel filter, where either the mechanic said they can't, or they haven't, or it hasn't been included in a full service. If a fuel filter is blocked, that could cause you no end of problems. It could make the pump die because the pump's trying to push the fuel, but the filter's stopping it. All sorts of reasons. The filters aren't that expensive. On most cars, they're underneath. They're just 2 barbed clips either side. They look a bit like this with a little barb either side, and they just push on. Well worth doing. If you haven't got any record of it, definitely get one done prior to going for a map, because it's just little things like that, general servicing items, that can cause you loads of problems down the other end. Because at the end of the day, you've saved up, let's say, £300, £400 for a map, because it's quite possible. You go there, you get it on there, and then they write you a list of all the things that's wrong with it, and they can't give you the map on the day. How disappointed are you going to be? Common issues when mapping. I've already said block fuel filter, old spark plugs, diverter valves weak. Now this is if you have a recirculating dump valve, diverter valve, which basically any build up in pressure comes out of the boost system and back into the air system. If that's weak, as soon as they up the boost, because on most cars your boost will be set at one figure and then they might add 5 or 6 psi onto that when they map it, that valve may not hold, and then you'll start leaking. I mean, a genuine Volkswagen Audi Group one is about £25 to £35. Well worth doing. If your one's original, just make sure it works, make sure it's strong, make sure it's not leaking. It's really easy to test. I've got a video for that in common issues, which I'll link up in the corner now. PCV system is blocked. Now, if your car has a PCV system, most of them do for breathers, they're filled with oily air, and they're really, really common for blocking, no matter how old your car is. So just make sure, if you can get a smoke test prior, or if you can at least have a look at it, give them a feel, give them a squeeze, make sure there's no obvious oil sweat around them, make sure there are no obvious cracks, you can obviously bend the pipes a little bit, make sure there's no fraying, cracking, make sure they're all connected properly. If they're mix and match, a lot of the time it's 3mm silicone, which is like £3 a metre, so can be replaced relatively easy, but without messing about. If there's any small leaks, and I'm talking any at all, whether it be boost pipes, PCV pipes, anything like that, it can result in quite a big power loss. So it's definitely worth checking, because your car may have had a map already, but it's down on power because it's got a boost leak and it's in limp mode. You just don't know. If you have a turbo car, definitely recommend getting a boost gauge, because that is the easiest way to know if you have a problem. If you have a boost gauge, you're out for a drive, you look, and you've only got 5 psi, you know you've got a problem, because you're meant to have 10 or 12 or 15, whatever you're meant to have. It's nice to have a recommendation of that, or recommendation. Nice to have it visibly obvious on there. Plus, it's quite cool looking. Easy enough to run most of the time. So that's kind of the common issues which will be caused when mapping. You might have a weak fuel pump, but you may not know that until you go for a map. The other things, mapping a car could put strain on your car, because if you imagine your car's maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 years old, and it's been used to driving as it is, and if you go for a software map, usually software maps tend not to cause as many issues. It's more when you go for a hardware and software map, when you're trying to go for an extra 20-30% horsepower, you may start to notice issues. Now, the things like that are failing fuel pumps, because obviously they're having to push really hard, especially if you're going to uprate your injectors. The pump might not be built for that, and after 20 years might be a bit wheezy and might not be able to push it out. Slipping clutch, that is super common. You imagine a clutch is 80 to 150,000 miles old, and then you add on, I don't know, 80 to 100 foot-pound of torque. It's suddenly going to go, whoa, hold on a minute, and start slipping. Super common on a stage 2 on most is a slippy clutch. Old split and cracked pipes. If you imagine all your boost pipes are used to say 10 to 12 psi, and then you start smashing 18 psi through them, it's going to make them work harder, isn't it? So there is the potential that it could make them split, pop, whatever. Popping hoses off, super common. Just one little tip for boost pipes. If you ever take a boost pipe off, or any kind of intercooler pipe work or anything like that, take the pipe off. Some sort of cleaner, whether it be brake cleaner or some sort of other anti-oil cleaner, wipe the inside of the pipe, wipe the external of whatever you're slipping it onto. Good Jubilee clip, never have a problem. And do you have good tyres? Now this sounds stupid, but I've seen it before, is that if you have bad tyres, whether they be bald, crap, whatever reason, cracked, your car's going to go into the dyno, and they're going to be doing run after run, and they could be going up to 100 miles an hour, and it's quite a bit of strain. If you imagine it's against those 2 metal rollers, there's the potential for it to blow out. If you want to see what that looks like, just type in YouTube tyre blow during running road or rolling road or remap or whatever. There is loads of videos out there, and it can make a right mess. So just consider that definitely prior to going. Now, all of these things considered, I think you'll have a great time mapping. You can map a car whether it's done 5,000 miles or 200,000 miles. My TT has done 185,000 miles. It has had a map. It's had a stage 2. It's had some hardware and software. It runs an absolute dream. Did I have some problems? Yes, my spark plugs were crap. They knocked out. I've replaced the spark plugs, and then the coil pack struggled. So it's literally, I had it mapped, went down the road, floored it, started misfiring. So definitely to be considered. Fuel filter I had to change because that was blocked, but I changed that prior to getting it mapped. And these are all things that I have seen on forums. People talk about personal experiences myself, and it just makes your day on the rolling road that bit better. By all means, contact companies, speak to them, see if they offer a health check service before the map, because it might be worth popping in there, just getting them to do a dyno run, health check, smoke test, whatever, just to identify any problems prior to having it mapped. Ideally, if you can get a remap on a rolling road rather than just a plug-in, it gives you that opportunity just to be able to check that car a little bit further. Yes, you can do plug-in maps, like I think Revo and stuff, they offer a map where they send it to you, but I like to get a car onto the rolling road, get a health check. Do you know what I mean? Because if you run it, do a dyno before, do a dyno after, you have a physical proof that there's no issues. If you go up, mine went up and then the fuel pump sort of died and you see it spiking and it had all sorts of issues, but they have the power to do that because they've got it plugged in on a computer. If you have any questions or you'd like to know any sort of reputable companies, feel free to drop me a message in the below. I'll put some details in the description of companies recommended or companies used by people that we recommend. And also, CJ Mechanical does health checks on cars as well, so you can book in for there, as well as many other mechanics I'm sure will happily give it a smoke test. So until the next one, guys, thanks for watching. Bye for now.